Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and welcome to the Tiny Bookcase. Right now, you're listening to our favourite part of the week.
Stories, discussion, and a high likelihood of gratuitous obscenities, all to sate the hunger of the bibliomancer Ysteris.
Regular listeners will know how it works, but for newcomers, Nico and I have both written a story to the same shared prompt.
We're about to share those stories with each other and you for the first time. Then, we'll workshop them on mic. The prompt for this episode is The Glass Egg. And Ben, you're first to serve me an excellent tale.
The Glass Egg. Time had become strange. It began one dull morning on which Lewis was befuddling eggs. Hungover and already tired from anticipating his workday, he carelessly opened the carton, cracked the first egg on the edge of the pan, and then impotently rubbed at it with a notched silicon spatula. Were they going to be scrambled? Or, if he fucked it up, a dry omelette? The joy, he thought, is in the surprise. The view beyond his kitchen window had once been of a grand cricket pavilion, and although he'd not had the patience to watch a game in years, the crack of ball on bat had been joyful punctuation to many a Sunday morning. No longer. The concrete-clad steel bones of what would be a posh high-rise apartment building now squatted where the stumps once stood. The area had been a building site for 6 months since the local club had been sold to a boomer developer. Lewis often saw the developer's Maserati parked by the worksite fence, and the few glimpses he'd caught of him had led Lewis to suspect the man would climax if anyone referred to him as a housing tycoon. Lewis shook his head, feeling his millennial idealism slouch into middle-aged apathy. The egg mixture in the pan spat a defiant reminder at him. Wet lines of dripped albumen traced the path his hand took from the pan to the bin as he discarded the shells. He muttered the daily curse as a curved flake found its way into the mixture. And, tongue firmly wedged between his teeth, Lewis employed a technique he'd learnt from a 15-minute YouTube tutorial to scoop the shell with another bit of shell. 3 eggs today, what a treat! The lame desire to get as much vitamin D into his body as possible was, he knew, a necessary part of his quest to find any fucks to give about his Tuesday. The third egg shattered unexpectedly as he tapped it on the pan. Its golden yolk slid into the mixture, dragging the pale coat with it. Blood dripped from his hand and turned the gas flame briefly red where it pattered on the stovetop. Shit! Lewis looked at his hand. Shards of transparent glass stuck out of the pads of his fingers. On autopilot, he ran it under the tap and gently tweezed the pieces out with oversized barbecue tongs before wrapping his hand in a stained tea towel. He smelt the bottom of his omelette, catching, and quickly turned the burner off. Most of the strange shell had landed outside the pan, and Lewis had been raised not to waste food. He slid the meal onto a plate. Looks fine. No sharp, shiny bits in it at all, he thought. Next, 2 people's worth of ketchup was applied in artful zigzags. The effect was somewhat ruined when the rapidly emptying squeezy bottle farted out its last drops. Lewis ate the result of his efforts in his dressing gown before skipping his shower and pulling on yesterday's clothes with just enough time to catch his bus. He didn't think any more about the glass egg until later that day. What the fuck was that? He muttered to the cubicle door as he shat on work time. He was sure it was glass, not translucent shell, but glass. Weird. Work, unusually, flew past him after that. The faint thrill of productivity left him feeling vaguely better about himself as he marched through the drizzle back to the bus. He carefully dug for the remnants of the shell when he got home. Coated in bin juice, he saw it had been tapered at the top before he'd cracked it, like it was one half of an old-fashioned hourglass. Lewis gave up on the mystery as his evening of video games and TV shows stretched before him. He luxuriated in that, then slept like a lightning-felled tree. The next morning found him chipper, and to his surprise, work was over in a flash. He was back at home watching worthy TV dramas on his comfy sofa before he'd had time to bemoan his Wednesday at all. Funny that, he thought. Thursday and Friday ripped past in a similar fashion. The weekend, however, passed slowly, and by the end of it, the free time he'd spent noodling about on his keyboard and drinking with friends had given him the same respite as though he'd gone on a long holiday. What the fuck is happening? Lewis felt all the slow bits of his life speed up, like sand falling through the timer, faster and faster, only to suddenly linger on pleasures, relaxation, and moments of joy. It felt good. Through the stop-motion aperture of his kitchen window, Lewis watched the posh high-rise grow dilapidated faster than it could be built. Then, the local news announced the project would be abandoned after the developer was found desiccated in his Maserati. Terence whooped for joy when he found out that grisly detail. His life began to stream past him at such a pace that Lewis began watching the news to find out what he'd missed. Fantastical stories abounded. Conservatives and racists began to fill up care homes before their time was due. The exponential increase of fresh, younger politicians caused an influx of voters to the electorate. Political strategies began to veer away from wealth growth and jingoism, only to skew towards inclusion and collaboration. Fossil fuel cars had become inoperably slow, with electric buses and renewable energy vehicles whizzing past them to make even the longest of trips feel short. The wars in the East stopped when the bloodthirsty commanders were rapidly relegated to wheelchairs fitted with oxygen tanks. Their aging despot paymasters vanished into history, hands turning to dust before they could push their red buttons. "I think it's me. I think I'm doing something," he'd say to his mates as his weekends fused together into one long holiday, whilst his bank account filled with money earned from labour he no longer noticed. They laughed. His discontent with the world began to return as infrastructure and due processes began to fail and fall before the strange new rhythm of time. Lewis started to lose parts of his weekends as he grew bored of the same pattern repeating over and over again. Then he lost a whole week, then two, and a third, until he felt his grasp on his life slipping when whole months would pass with nothing enjoyable to slow them down. He knew he must be sleeping, eating, and drinking, but had no memories of doing so. In those brief moments when he came back to himself, Lewis would try to slow it down by renewing his interests or trying to plan trips. It never worked. The moment he became bored of legwork, he would blink and a month had passed. No joy remained in him as the imbalance of his existence failed to accompany the sweet with the sour. A year passed, then 3. The rare glimpses he caught of himself in the black reflective monolith of his TV told him he was visibly aging. His friends faded from him, and his connection to the world unravelled. Lewis felt as though he was hurtling forwards through his life without any time to hold thoughts in his mind, and no understanding of how to find enjoyment again. Then one day, Lewis stumbled to a stop. He found he was in his living room, which contained a mess of dilapidated belongings. He desperately lunged for the TV remote to find something to make the moment last longer. It did not turn on. Lewis, wincing with the fear of how much time he had lost and might lose again, felt the moment stretch naturally. The world seemed peaceful. His beard was long, and he realized he was wearing the rags of rotting clothes. His joints creaked as he stood up from the stained sofa. He blinked, feeling the fear that at any moment he would be ripped forwards again. But nothing continued to happen. Lewis, stunned, wandered into the ruin of his kitchen and stared out of his window. Wind rustled the overgrown forest which dominated the view. He saw it had rained recently, as the wild weeds, bushes, and trees were slick with moisture. Here and there, he saw the rusted bones of the building he had hated were sticking out of the foliage. Nothing, on a human scale, was happening. Time had ended.
I really liked that.
Thought you might.
I really like the a kind of very sort of bleak millennial irreverence of the first part,
Mm.
slipping into an actually quite serious and very heartfelt message was, yeah, just really nicely handled. there were some, some jokes at the beginning. You were talking about using the big barbecue tongs as
Yeah.
tweezers. Like it's such a relatable image. This making do. What have I got? Oh, fuck! I don't want to waste food. All of those ideologies that really are like synonymous with our generation.
Mm.
That whole a little bit of, I feel like things are getting worse, and also things should be better, and then it's filling our lives in with our version of joy, and then even that is eventually nothing. Yeah, just really solid concept, really nicely told.
I sort of wanted to take a thank you for a start, and I wanted to take a swing at like my version of Groundhog Day,
Yeah,
um, what that would be like, and the time had become strange line. It was one of those moments where just a line just pops into your head, and I wasn't sure what that was going to become at some point. I wrote it down in my drill book a while ago,
yeah,
um, and then when we decided on the prompt, I thought I was thinking maybe like glass, like hourglass. So there was like a time element to that.
yeah,
So that's sort of where it came from. But yeah, I think actually like the meat and potatoes of this, like the actual like the message of this story, it is quite heartfelt from me. I think it's
yeah,
this. I think probably there's a point at which every generation feels like they aren't powerful enough to overcome the fuck ups of the previous generation, but
yeah,
also they are becoming indolent in that knowledge and are in danger of becoming this kind of like lazy masters of the world that
yeah,
they hate for the next generation. Um, and I sort of wanted that to tie hand in hand with this idea that I feel like you have to have both. You have to have sweet. You have to have sour.
yeah.
You can't have peaks without troughs. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and like if you've done like a, I remember many years ago when I was about 14 or something. I took apart a kitchen, and it's not super heavy duty work, but it's just kind of like it's a lot of manual labor, and it takes a while, and you've got to do it kind of carefully so you don't ruin the whole room when you're refitting the next kitchen,
Yeah,
And so it sort of tore out this old kitchen, and after this sort of day of having done this, um, I had I had a single Budweiser glass bottle of beer, and it like that's really weak bad beer. It's not good beer, but it
yeah,
tasted amazing because
of course.
you know because I sort of earned it, not in like a people don't deserve things kind of way, but just in like it tasted better because I had earned it rather than
Yeah,
you're
because
not
you
allowed it if you
rewarded
don't.
yourself for a
Yeah,
job well done. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that was actually a really cool lesson to learn at that age because I've tried to apply that through the rest of my life so far. Um, and it feels like it's becoming more and more pertinent because there's like a degree of like panicked hope that when you go through all of the really unpleasant shit of being an adult, the boring, mundane tasks that you have to do regularly, the job
yeah,
that you have to do in order to pay the bills for the house that you don't necessarily want to be in. Um, like there has to be something good at the end of that in order to make it
yeah,
all worthwhile. And I've definitely gone through periods where I've indulged too much in the fun and let the life
yeah.
stuff slip, and I've felt it bite me in the ass. And this is my sort of reminder to myself that I do have to do both. Otherwise, I'll blink and I'll miss this very important thing, which is my life.
That's really beautiful, man.
Thank you.
The I'm gonna bring it back to the writing just a little bit,
Yeah, sure.
simply because I want to talk about it's a setup and then delivery, and it's so subtle. It doesn't even really matter to the story, but it told me everything about the character. Which is at the beginning, he's saying, he's making eggs. He doesn't know what sort of eggs they're going to be. The fun is in the surprise. But in that bit, you say, if he fucks it up, it'll be an omelette. And
Mm.
then later, you say he could smell his omelette starting to
Yeah,
catch.
yeah.
So he's just already accepted. Well, I fucked that up, didn't I? And
Yeah.
that's a great 1-2 combo. It really is. Like
Thank you.
you know, it delivered wrong. You could miss it, but it was so without you putting emphasis onto it. It gave me so much information about the situation and the character. You know, and then he was willing to pour a load of ketchup on a thing. The only ketchup thing you didn't mention was that first like piss squirt of ketchup you always
Oh
get.
yeah, that where it's sort of just it's thin. It's not the right consistency yet.
Just unexpected. Where did all this water come from? Why isn't the rest of it now a solid? Where is this from?
I think had I gone down that route, we might have heard the line coming out of my mouth of tomato pre-cum, which I just don't think. I think that would have changed the tone of that story.
I don't know, man. I'm into it. You did talk about the boomer jizzing in his pants if someone called him a property tycoon, which I
Yeah,
also really
you know,
liked.
you know, I like that bit too, but almost to the point where I'm like, do I like that bit too much? Is that too indulgent? Am I being like too caricature at that point?
Is that for the
Um,
story, or is that because I think it's funny and
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
come up against that quite a lot?
Do you know what? Yeah, you know what I mean. Um, no, but like this is a thing that I find with you know, I know a lot of boomers. I love a lot of boomers, but like generally, there is an approach to the housing market that these people have, which is provably bad,
Yeah,
and there's like an excitement to it for them that makes me feel a bit unwell. Um,
it's there's some like terminology, like the tycoon one's good, but the term landlord,
yeah,
where you know, to a certain generation, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a landlord, and what they're saying is, I have been able to afford multiple properties, and that shows that I'm good.
mm,
And our generation hear landlord, and what we hear is square footage hoarder.
yeah, yeah. People that have damaged
Like
the housing market.
it's like maybe sell them. Look, I'm not gonna get too on my soapbox here, but if everyone stopped paying their rent for a year, prices would have to go down. Just saying. What are they gonna do? Arrest all of us? Um,
That's one of those sort of famous last words, isn't it? You know, what are they going to do? Arrest all of us? Shoot us all?
no, we're living in the time of you're gonna own nothing, enjoy it, aren't we? Was it Ubisoft where the guy came out and he was like, "Hey, you're just gonna have to get used to not actually owning your games. Give us
Yes, I think it was.
quid to play this game, and we'll take it away when we feel like it." Now, hang on.
Oh dear. Yeah, no, it's all a bit of a mess, isn't it? But you never know. We might get sort of like a Dune style Butlerian jihad against AI soon, so it might all get
There's
really
so
interesting very quickly.
there's a fascinating thing going on in AI at the moment. So it's really affecting the IT sector because a lot
Yeah.
of people before who would say, "Right, I need X for a website. I better ask someone to do it." We're going on ChatGPT and saying, "Make me a website that looks like this. I need code," and it would spit out accurate code. So now a bunch of developers are code bombing all these AIs. So they say, "Can you tell me the code for this, please?" And when it delivers it, they say, "Oh no, I can tell you that that is incorrect. This is the right code,"
Mm,
and feeding it incorrect code.
that's hilarious.
And yeah, this is the first stage of the war with the AI because we're just lying to it.
That's really interesting. That would only really affect the ones that they call LLMs, wouldn't it? The large
Yeah.
language modules or models or something. Um, but yeah, that's fascinating. That's really cool. I like that a lot. Yeah, well, I think quite enough about me and AI jihads. And it's time for you to tell your story, my friend. I want to hear about your
Okay.
glass egg.
It vibrates, you know.
you're gonna you're gonna have to give me a minute. Sorry.
The glass egg. Men in armor came. They came and they killed Sastek's whole tribe. My broodmate Taknas was a village defender. His scales shone near as bright as his armor. So fierce was his pride when he prowled our jungles. When he brought home meat for us, he did it with his teeth bared, a gesture we learned from the humans. It is one of their more confusing gestures. They show each other their bare fangs, but not in a show of dominance. The human smile. It was how they greeted us at first. They came with smiles and fruits. We do not eat fruit unless we need to force a sickness. We had eaten some of their explorers, as they called them. These people were to map the unknown places of the world. Sastek did not understand. This place is our home. It is known. We have no call for humans and their drawings of places as though seen through the soaring bird's eyes. You know your home with your heart. That way you are never lost. But humans do nothing with their hearts except for acts of savagery. Why else would they learn to bare their fangs and call it kindness? They wanted us to leave our home. Chieftain Tutfad told them no. This was our home. The snakes will bite with healing salves before we leave willingly. They showed their fangs to us and said they understood. They did understand, Sastek thinks. But they had already decided we were to be dealt with in the human way. When smoke began to coil from the jungle, Taknas went. He went with Jubnik and the other guardians. Their duty compelled them to protect the creatures and plants of our home. They thought perhaps the salamanders were in mating season too early, before the rain months could soak the wood to preserve it. Perhaps killed us, perhaps robbed us of our fear instinct. The guardians died before they even reached the flames. Sastek found their bodies, punctured through with the human steel fangs. Those humans poured into our village like a monsoon, shining in their false scales. The sound of them was that of 1,000 cookpots rattling as they ran. The warning drums played a half-dozen beats before an arrow found Chubnak's throat and stopped the hammering. By then, at least, there was screaming. It woke others, many of whom fought bravely, but our teeth and claws were made to tear the throats from prey. The cladding on these humans was too thick. Even still, some were pulled apart. Older males and strong females worked together to rend the limbs from them. The smell of blood was delectable, even as panic swept my kin. Sastek did not fight. Sastek thought only of the clutch. The eggs of Taknas and Sastek numbered only 4. They were close to hatching. By Sastek's count, at least. Sastek would feel the wriggling sometimes sat atop them. When the humans found where Sastek was hidden, there was little choice but to fight fiercely. But Sastek's hiding place was good. One human took its metal headpiece off. Sastek's grasp of their tongue is poor, but I knew the feeling of the words, even if the meaning was elusive. Vandal's cock, the bastards lay eggs. Well, I owe Eric a copper piece then. I could have sworn the scaly whores had cunny. More's the shame. Right, smash the fucking things. The humans it commanded moved, to the clutch, and Sastek knew there was time only to kill, lest the future be lost. Sastek's teeth found purchase on the bare-headed human. The rich and tangy taste of blood and man-meat delivered the drive to do what Sastek must. The human screamed, and Sastek's claws took away the windpipe. No time to relish, only time to kill, only time to protect the clutch. Even as Sastek made to kill the remaining pair, one brought a heavy boot down upon an egg. Sastek's heart shattered with the shell. The child inside was near ready to hatch. Sastek named them Tuckfoot as they squirmed their first and final breath. White-hot rage filled Sastek, and Sastek does not know how the other humans died. They were torn and broken. Even now their meat nourishes Sastek. 2 more of the clutch were slain. Sastek names them Taknaf and Takdis. The sorrow song will be sung in their honor for 24 moons. One of the brood was still within the egg. The shell was split and the birth jelly had oozed free, but still a flutter of heartbeat in the breast. No need for a name yet, no sorrow song. Sastek stole into the night with the final egg, the last remnants of a slain people. The egg Sastek coated in sand and goaded the salamanders to breathe upon it. Sastek made them fierce with violence and let the heat become an overwhelming force. So now the egg is sealed again. It cooled after some time. Sastek will defend it for as long as Sastek lives. It is even more precious than before. But now, Sastek can see the child within, through the hole those wicked humans made. The infant rests. It has been a trying time. Sastek watches through the melt sand. The final child of Taknas must be defended. Sastek watches through the melt sand. Sleep, precious one, until you are ready to hatch. Sastek watches through the melt sand.
Oh, that's deeply sad. Great story though. Really
Yeah.
liked it. The strong conquistador vibe from the humans. Did you...
Those famously northern conquistadors. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely agree. You're right.
Yeah, like that kind of initially coming with smiles sort of thing when they're weak, and then coming back with swords and armor and fire.
Yeah.
Really liked it. Really liked it. You know, it felt like it was rooted in human history, but was obviously not. It was still fantasy. Um,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed how you lingered on the image of this, not on the image, but the concept of how odd it is that humans show their teeth to smile,
Yeah.
and that's like, you know, that's us saying everything's okay, we're happy, but
But
for
any other animal.
every other animal, it's stay the fuck away or I'm gonna eat you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I really liked it. The this idea that the line was something along the lines of when they were talking about how they were trying to map the unknown, and Sastek says, you know, this is our home, it is known.
Yeah.
That had a strong emotional peak for me at that moment. I really enjoyed it, and also
I
I enjoyed
think.
well, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, I think anything like that. Whenever I read about or hear about things that white people went and did to the Native Americans or to the Aztec people, or
Yeah,
I am always hit with this sadness, and I think putting it through this like fantasy race lens makes it more palatable and easier to discuss for people who
yeah,
aren't as aware of it.
yeah. I'd agree with that. I saw something the other day, and unfortunately, I can't necessarily remember it well enough to be able to like credit who it was from. But the quote was something along the lines of that non-fiction is learning through facts, and fiction is learning through imagination.
Mm. Oh, I like that.
And that's a really good example of that, I think, where you've taken a quite a sensitive subject, which is, this sort of brutal early colonialism, and transposed it in order to be able to talk about it, which is really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, whenever you hear like people say like, "Oh, when Europeans discovered America," it's like, there were people already there, motherfucker. What?
They knew what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it always astounds me.
Yeah.
And it feels very, for me anyway, that felt like a story that's really pertinent at the moment. I've been thinking a lot recently about how strange it is when one culture encounters another, because I know we've both been watching quite a lot of Shogun, the
Yes.
HBO's new the FX show. Sorry, not HBO. Um, and that's deeply rooted in that. The James Clavell book from the 70s, I think it was 75. I think that book came out.
Yeah.
Was all about uh, you know in this case an Elizabethan Englishman um, landing on the shores of Japan and being a fish out of water and leaping from problem to problem, desperately trying to keep himself alive and keep his crew alive.
Yeah.
There's just something about that I find incredibly relatable. We were talking earlier with my story about how difficult modern life is, and I often feel like I am just leaping from problem to problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes you solve a problem very eloquently, and the effects of it are good. Other times it's a bit messy and it leads to more problems. It's a really interesting way to pace a story, and I like the way that you executed it here. Because it was from the reverse point of view. It was from the native, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking of which, I really enjoyed the third person speaking of themselves. That was very alien,
Yeah.
and it did something immediately for the world building that worked really well. Because the thing that it did was to show that, oh, this is something else. This is something other than
Yeah.
human. Really liked it, and then you continued that with like really nice bits of description. So there's sort of there's like what I sort of term as like concealed description. Where it's like hidden
Yeah.
knowledge, where Sastek talks about whether the salamanders had started the fire early this season, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like what you didn't do was give us a whole paragraph about how the ecosystem works. You just mentioned it, and that was
Yeah.
enough. And not only was that enough, it also set up the turning of the sand into melt sand for you later. So it was
Yeah.
really, really well done. The 1,000 cooking pans rattling is a great description of armor, and it proves that they're from a non-martial culture because
Yeah.
the only thing that they can relate to it is something mundane and functional, like a piece of cookware, because they don't wear armor. Um, it was really nice. It was very not, I'm going to say the word competent, but not in the sense that it wasn't like brilliant. It just I mean
Oh,
like
nice.
it was like
I get what you're
woven
saying.
like you were just like you were precisely punching your way through that story, building up the tension, using narrative and writing techniques to achieve world building in the short space of words that you had. It's great. That's a really good example of a short story for this podcast, and a really good
Thank
response
you.
to this prompt.
It's quite short as well. It's 901 words.
So that was sort of what I was going to ask next because
Yeah.
it didn't feel short, but I felt like you'd achieved quite a lot of story in very few words.
It was one of those where I'd finished it and I read back and I thought, do I want to add anything? Do I want to expand anything? But I couldn't see anywhere that it wouldn't be adding words for the sake of adding words.
Mm, yeah,
So I think if you go, well, I could do more world, like with the salamanders is a great example. I could do a load more world building here and explain how the dry and wet seasons work in my head and what they actually use that fire for. But if I do that, then I'd need to do it on the rest of the
yeah.
description to make it all line up. And I was just, it's nice when it happens, but I was just happy with it.
It was
I've
tight to
just
the
had my
prompt.
classes. Yeah,
Yeah, the world building that you did was tight to the prompt, and that's the way to do it, I think. Yeah, I liked that a lot. I particularly liked the idea of calling glass melt sand.
yeah,
I don't know whether I've encountered that before. That feels fresh to me. Obviously, the sort of the kind of word you're evoking is meltwater,
yeah,
and but here it's you're using it to create a visual image of something that we already have a word for. So again, it reinforces that alien nature of the creatures that you're writing from the perspective of. Yeah, solid,
Yeah, I think
solid stuff.
I hope it was new because it was one of my creations.
Yeah,
I
I
did
mean,
pop it into Google and I got melt sandwich as the top result.
melts.
So
Oh,
who
as in like a
knows?
sandwich, as in like a cheese melt. Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
I
Yeah.
assume so. Tuna melt, maybe. Ooh.
Ooh. Ooh.
A melt sandwich is a type of hot sandwich containing a suitable meltable cheese.
You heard it
Brackets,
here first,
sometimes
folks.
grated. Close brackets. There is a whole Wikipedia page on melt sandwich.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Oh,
Does it ever mention the fact that there shouldn't be glass in it?
oh yeah, if using eggs, please remove any made of glass.
There you
Nice.
go. Otherwise, you will damage time. Ah,
Oh,
good.
see also croque monsieur. Love it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?